The knock on the door was deliberate, a steady rhythm that demanded attention, yet lacked urgency. I glanced up from my laptop, momentarily pulled away from the spreadsheet I'd been working on for hours. The sound wasn't the kind you'd expect from a delivery driver or a neighbor dropping by to ask for something. It felt calculated, almost methodical. When I opened the door, I found Carol Aldridge standing there. Carol was the wife of Terry Aldridge, one of my longest-standing clients and someone I'd come to regard as a friend. Her usually immaculate exterior betrayed subtle signs of distress. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She was dressed as impeccably as always, as though she'd just stepped out of one of those expensive boutiques she loved. But her face told a different story. Her eyes, rimmed with red and underscored by dark shadows, betrayed an exhaustion that no amount of makeup could conceal. "Carol," I greeted her, my brow furrowing. "Is everything all right?" "Henry, can I come in?" I blinked, caught off guard, but stepped aside to let her in. "Of course. Come in," I said, my tone uncertain. We weren't strangers, not entirely. Carol and I had crossed paths many times at client dinners and social events. She was always Terry's polished, charming counterpart, effortlessly gracious in any setting. But now, as she stood awkwardly in my hallway, looking as though she hadn't slept in days, it was clear that something was very wrong. "Coffee? Tea?" I offered, motioning toward the kitchen. "No, thank you," she replied quickly. This isn't a social visit." Her tone made me stop in my tracks. "Can we sit? This might take some time." I nodded silently and led her to the couch. She perched uneasily on the edge of the cushion, her posture stiff and her gaze fixed downward. I settled across from her in the armchair, waiting. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this," she began at last, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know who else to talk to." She faltered, her breath catching as though she were fighting back tears. "It's fine," I reassured her, though the tension in the air said otherwise. "What's going on?" After a deep, shaky breath, she finally said it. "Henry, Terry is having an affair." My immediate reaction wasn't anger or disbelief. It was confusion. Why on earth was she telling me this? Terry was a client, yes, and we'd built a casual friendship over the years, but Carol's decision to confide in me about something so personal felt out of place, unless her words had pointed me toward the realization even before she confirmed it. "It's Melanie," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Your wife." The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in as the air thickened. It seemed impossible, absurd even, but Carol's expression left no room for doubt. "Are you sure?" I asked, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Yes," she replied, her tone resolute. "I'm not here to speculate, Henry. I've seen it with my own eyes." She reached into her bag and retrieved a stack of photographs. The first photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but it left no room for misinterpretation. Melanie and Terry sat across from each other at a dimly lit restaurant. His hand rested on hers, and her head was tilted toward him in a way that made my stomach churn with anger. There were more photos. Melanie's car parked outside a hotel, Terry brushing her hair back as they stood close on a sidewalk. The timestamps on the images painted a damning picture. This wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for weeks, maybe even months. "I thought you deserved to know," Carol said quietly, her eyes fixed on me. This isn't the first time Terry's done something like this. But I know how much you and Melanie mean to each other, and I couldn't keep silent anymore." My thoughts churned, flipping through memories in search of clues I had missed. The late nights Melanie had spent at work, the business trips that always seemed to extend unexpectedly, her phone always kept just out of reach. How had I not seen this coming? "I think this isn't the first time Terry's done this," she admitted. "But this time, I'm not going to let it destroy my life. I came here because, well, maybe we can help each other." "Help each other?" I repeated, unsure of what she meant. "We can't just let them get away with this," she said, her tone sharp with anger. "They've betrayed us. They've made fools of us." I frowned, unsure of where this was heading. "Okay," I said cautiously, "but what exactly are you suggesting?" Carol drew in a shaky breath before sitting up straighter, meeting my gaze with a fiery intensity. I don't want to confront Terry, not yet. If I go at him without a plan, he'll turn it around on me. He always does. But if we work together, if we gather enough evidence, we can expose them both. Expose them? I echoed, my confusion deepening. To who? For what? To everyone, she said, her voice unwavering. Their friends, their families, anyone who matters to them. I want them to feel the humiliation they've put us through. And if it costs Terry his reputation, his career, even better. There was something deeper at play here, something darker. A thirst for retribution. I don't know, Carol, I said cautiously. This isn't really my style. She smirked, but it was empty. There was no humor in it. I didn't think it was mine either, Henry. But here we are. Look, I get it. This is a lot to take in. But think about what they've done. They've lied to us. They've disrespected us. And they did it with no thought for the damage it would cause. Do you really want to just let it slide? Of course, I didn't want to let it slide. The images of Melanie and Terry together, their betrayal so casual, so careless, were seared into my mind. But actually taking action, actively seeking revenge, was a step I wasn't sure I was ready for. Even if I wanted to do this, I said, I'm not sure how we'd go about it. What are we supposed to do? Carol's face lit up, as if she'd been waiting for me to ask. Hire a private investigator? We don't need to. I've already started. What? She reached into her bag once more and pulled out a slim black folder, handing it to me. I've been tracking Terry's movements for weeks. Phone records, credit card statements, even his location history. And I've got more photos, videos, everything we need to confront them. I flipped through the folder, my stomach twisting as I scanned the detailed logs. Hotel receipts, dinner reservations, screenshots of text messages exchanged between Terry and Melanie. Carol had done her homework. She'd been thorough. It was obvious this wasn't some rash decision she'd made on the spot. This is a lot, I said, closing the folder and setting it down. How did you even get all of this? I have a friend who works in tech, she said with a casual shrug. He owed me a favor. I know this is a lot, she said quietly, but you deserve to know the truth, Henry. And you deserve justice. I let out a bitter laugh. Justice? What does that even look like in a situation like this? Whatever we decide it is, she replied firmly. That's the beauty of it. We're in control now. What do you want from me, Carol? I asked, finally breaking the silence. Her expression softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath the coldness. I want your help. Terry trusts you, right? You can get close to him, closer than I can without raising suspicion. If we work together, we can figure out exactly how far this goes. And when the time's right, we can expose them. Okay, I said at last, my voice firm. I'll help you. At home, Melanie was as cheerful and unbothered as ever. She moved through our daily routines with the same effortless grace that had once charmed me. But now, every laugh, every kiss on the cheek, every casual "I love you" felt hollow. It was all an act, so convincing that I might have believed it if I hadn't known the truth. Are you okay? She asked one evening as she leaned against the kitchen counter while I loaded the dishwasher. Yeah, I replied, not looking up. Work's just been stressful. She nodded, offering me a small smile. You've been quiet lately. If you need to talk about anything, I'm here. The irony of her words hit me hard. I forced a smile and nodded, loathing how effortlessly she looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. The first part of our plan involved me getting closer to Terry, just like Carol had suggested. It wasn't hard. Terry and I already had a weekly golf game on the books. That Saturday, I showed up early, my mind racing with how to handle the conversation. Henry, Terry called out as he approached, his usual grin plastered on his face. You're early. Trying to psych me out? Something like that, I replied, forcing a chuckle. We started the game as usual, talking about work and sports, while Terry laughed and cracked jokes. You've been working late a lot, huh? I asked casually as I lined up my shot. Terry glanced at me, his expression flickering for just a moment with something I couldn't quite identify. Yeah, You know how it is. Busy season. I straightened up, leaning on my club. Melanie's been working late too. Seems like both our spouses are busier than usual these days. For a brief moment, Terry froze. It was subtle, a slight pause as he adjusted his grip on his driver, but I saw it. Then he laughed, but it was forced, louder than necessary. Yeah, well, that's life, right? Always something going on. He quickly steered the conversation back to sports, but the tension in his body betrayed him. It was a small win, but it told me everything I needed to know. Later that night, Carol called me, her voice tinged with excitement as she recounted her own findings. I found something big, she said. Terry's been using a burner phone to contact Melanie. I got the number from our phone records and traced it to a hotel downtown. They've been meeting there every Thursday. Every Thursday? I repeated, the pieces falling into place. Yeah, which means they're probably meeting again this week. If we can catch them in the act. Carol didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what she was suggesting. The idea of confronting them, of seeing it with my own eyes, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, but a part of me wasn't sure I was ready for what was about to unfold. What's the plan? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my insides were a whirlwind. We follow them, Carol replied, her tone simple and to the point. I'll handle Terry, and you take care of Melanie. If we catch them together, they won't have any way to deny it. Thursday came faster than I expected. Carol and I met in the parking garage of the downtown hotel. They're here, she said as I approached. Terry's car's in the lot, and Melanie checked in about 20 minutes ago. My heart hammered as we made our way toward the lobby. Carol had already set everything up. A discreet employee on her payroll had gotten her access to the guest list and provided a spare keycard to their room. We didn't speak as we took the elevator up to the 7th floor. Carol led the way to room 712, handing me the keycard. Are you ready? She whispered. No, I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, but I nodded, sliding the keycard into the reader and pushing the door open. What I saw inside was something I would never forget. Terry and Melanie were there, tangled together on the bed, their laughter faltering immediately when the doors swung open. The shock on their faces might have been laughable under different circumstances, but in that moment, it was devastating. Melanie's eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth as she scrambled to cover herself. Terry shot up, his face going bright red as he stammered for an explanation. Henry, this isn't, Melanie began, but I cut her off. Save it, I said coldly, my voice trembling with barely controlled fury. I've seen enough. Carol stepped forward. Congratulations, Terry. You've officially destroyed everything. Terry and Melanie sat frozen on the bed, their expressions a mix of fear and shame. Carol stood beside me, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing into icy slits of contempt. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Melanie broke the silence. Henry, her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. It's not what it looks like. I let out a bitter, hollow laugh, the sound harsh and bitter even to my own ears. Not what it looks like. Melanie, you're sitting in a hotel room with Terry. How exactly am I supposed to interpret this? Let's all just calm down, Terry said, his voice trying to maintain some semblance of authority. There's no need to make this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is? Carol's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the floor as she jabbed a finger at him. You've been lying to me, to Henry, for God knows how long, and now you want to downplay it? Carol's voice was cutting, and her glare was like ice. Unbelievable. Terry flinched under her gaze, but I saw that familiar arrogance creeping back into his expression. He was the type who thought he could talk his way out of anything, but this time, there was no way he could weasel out of it. How long? I asked, my voice low but unwavering. Melanie's eyes flicked to Terry, searching for some kind of reassurance. That small, instinctive movement was enough to send a fresh wave of fury surging through me. Even now, after everything, she was looking to him for answers. How long? I repeated, my voice rising this time. Finally, Melanie met my gaze, her lip trembling. A few months, she confessed. It just happened. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my voice echoing off the walls. A few months? You expect me to believe that it started 6 months ago? Carol cut in sharply, her arms still crossed, her tone cold. I have the receipts, Melanie. Don't even think about downplaying it. I didn't mean for this to happen, Melanie stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. Henry, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I scoffed, bitterness lacing my words. That's funny, because you've been doing a damn good job of it. Don't blame her entirely, Terry cut in, his voice smooth and defensive. It takes two, Henry. Maybe if you'd been paying more attention at home. Before he could finish, I was on him. My fist slammed into his jaw, sending him crashing back onto the bed. Melanie screamed, and Carol gasped, but I didn't care. The rage, the humiliation, the pain I'd been bottling up all exploded in that single moment. Henry, stop! Melanie cried, grabbing my arm. I turned to her, fury lacing my voice. You don't get to tell me what to do. I laughed, a humorless, empty sound. You're damn right I'm crazy. Crazy enough to think you were my friend. Carol stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Henry, he's not worth it. Let it go. Her voice was calm, steady, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Reluctantly, I stepped back, my fists still clenched at my sides. This isn't over, I said, my gaze flicking between Terry and Melanie, not by a long shot. I turned and walked toward the door, my breath shallow and ragged. Carol followed closely behind, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. As we stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind us, muffling the frantic arguing inside. In the parking lot, the adrenaline that had fueled me began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. Carol leaned against her car, arms wrapped around herself, her expression unreadable. Are you okay? She asked softly. I shook my head. Not even close. She nodded, as though she'd anticipated my answer. What now? I asked finally, my voice hoarse from the tension. Carol pressed her lips into a tight line. Now, we figure out how to make them pay. Her words carried a sharp edge that made me uneasy. Revenge had sounded satisfying in theory, but after what I had just witnessed, I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go. What does that even look like? I asked. What's the endgame here? She exhaled sharply, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. For me? It's about destroying Terry. His career, his reputation, everything. He's gotten away with too much for too long. And Melanie? I asked, my chest tightening at the thought. Carol shrugged. That's up to you. But you can't let her walk away from this without facing any consequences. If you do, she'll think she can get away with it again. I need time to think, I said, finally finding the words. Carol nodded, her expression softening. Take all the time you need, but don't wait too long. They won't. I watched her climb into her car and drive off, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot. The drive home felt like a blur. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger had dulled, replaced by a heavy, suffocating weight. Melanie's car wasn't in the driveway. The house was dark. The photos Carol had given me were still in my jacket pocket. I pulled them out, spreading them across the kitchen counter like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Melanie's face stared back at me in every shot, her smile warm and genuine. The same smile she had given me so many times over the years. Only now, it wasn't meant for me. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me from my thoughts. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:42 p.m. Melanie was home. She stepped inside, her face a perfect mask of forced calm. You're still up? She asked, her voice hesitant. I couldn't sleep, I replied, my tone sharper than I meant it to be. Henry, I think we need to talk. Yeah, I said. We do. I know how this looks, she began, her voice trembling. But I swear, it's not what you think. I let out a bitter laugh and shook my head. Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been sneaking around behind my back for months with one of my closest clients. Am I off base? She flinched at my words, her expression crumpling into something that resembled guilt. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said softly. It got out of control. Got out of control? I repeated, my voice rising. Melanie, this isn't an accident. This is months of lies and betrayal. Don't stand there and tell me it got out of control. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I love you, Henry. I never stopped loving you. Stop, I snapped, the words slicing through the air like a whip. Just stop. Don't insult me by pretending you still care about this marriage. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You've already lost me, Melanie, I said, my voice cold and steady. The moment you decided to betray me, you ended this. She broke then, her sobs filling the room as she sank to the floor. Stay with your sister tonight, I said, turning away. I don't want you here. Henry, please, she begged. But I didn't look back. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, leaving her behind. Upstairs, the bed we'd shared for years felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Terry in that hotel room, their betrayal playing on an endless loop in my mind. I'd wanted answers the night before, but now that I had them, they felt like a weight I couldn't shake. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but then I remembered Carol's message from the night before. Maybe she was checking in to see how I was holding up, or maybe to push forward with the next step of her plan. When I opened the door, it wasn't Carol. It was Terry. What the hell are you doing here? I asked, my voice low and cold. He held up his hands in a placating gesture, his face still swollen from where I'd punched him the night before. I just want to talk. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here, I said, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me. Terry flinched but didn't back down. I'm not here to make excuses, he said. I need you to understand that I never meant for this to happen. You never meant for this to happen? I repeated, my voice dripping with disdain. You mean you accidentally had an affair with my wife? For 6 months? It's not like that, he said quickly, his voice faltering. Henry, I swear, I didn't go looking for this. Melanie and we just connected. It was a mistake. A mistake? I interrupted, stepping closer. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. What you did was deliberate. It was calculated. Do you know what the worst part is? I trusted you. I invited you into my home. I defended you when people said you couldn't be trusted. And this is how you repay me? Look, he said, his voice tinged with regret. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to say my piece. You've said enough, I replied, my voice cold. Now get off my property. Later that day, Carol called. I wasn't surprised. She'd been relentless in her pursuit of retribution, and I knew she'd want to discuss the next phase of our plan. How are you holding up? She asked when I answered. How do you think? I replied. Terry showed up this morning. There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. What did he want? To apologize. To explain himself. Not that it made any difference. Of course it didn't, Carol said, her voice thick with venom. He thinks he can smooth things over with a few hollow words. That's what he always does. I leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing my temples. What's next, Carol? What's the endgame here? Because I'm not sure I can keep doing this. Her tone softened, but only slightly. Henry, I know this is hard, but if we don't see this through, they'll get away with it. They'll move on like nothing happened, and we'll be the ones left picking up the pieces. What are you suggesting? I asked, finally. I've been working on something, she said, her voice steady with purpose. If we time it right, we can take them both down in one shot. But it's going to take a little more effort on your part. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. What kind of effort? Meet me tomorrow, she said. I'll explain everything. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Carol looked as composed as ever, but there was a gleam in her eye that told me she was determined to see this through. I've been gathering more evidence, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Not just about the affair, but about Terry's business dealings. He's been skimming money from client accounts for years. If we expose him, it'll ruin his career. I opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. Bank statements, wire transfers, contracts, all of it meticulously documented. And Melanie? I asked. Carol smirked. That's the best part. If we play this right, we can tie her to it too. I've been digging into her finances, and let's just say there are some questionable expenditures. If we connect the dots, we can make it look like she was complicit. I don't know, I said, closing the folder. This feels extreme. Carol leaned forward, her expression intense. Henry, they didn't just cheat on us. They made us into fools. If we don't fight back, they'll win. Is that what you want? After a long pause, I finally nodded. All right, I said. Let's do it. Carol's smile was cold, triumphant. Good. They'll regret ever crossing us. Carol's plan was thorough, a blueprint for destruction that left nothing to chance. Over the next few days, she sent me updates, detailed lists of targets, evidence she'd uncovered, and strategies to ensure maximum fallout. Every time I opened one of her messages, I felt a mix of admiration and discomfort. She was relentless, her determination to see this through far surpassing my own. But the more I read, the more I realized I couldn't back out now. The wheels were already in motion. The first phase of the plan was to expose Terry's financial fraud. Carol had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence, linking him to embezzlement, tax evasion, and illegal transfers. It wasn't just incriminating, it was career-ending. You've got connections in his office, Carol said during one of our late-night phone calls. You can plant this where it'll do the most damage. And you're sure it'll hold up? I asked, still grappling with the gravity of what we were about to do. Absolutely, she replied, her confidence unwavering. I had it reviewed by someone who knows corporate law inside and out. Trust me, once this gets out, Terry's career is done. The plan was simple. I would deliver the documents anonymously to Terry's board of directors, ensuring they couldn't ignore the evidence. At the same time, Carol's contact, a disgruntled former employee of Terry's, would leak the information to the press, creating a scandal Terry couldn't control. The second phase targeted Melanie. While Carol focused on Terry's financial ruin, I turned my attention to Melanie's personal life, searching for vulnerabilities we could exploit. It felt dirty, digging through her social media, her bank statements, her emails, but the betrayal had hardened something inside me. I told myself it was justified. She'd made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. It didn't take long to find what Carol had been looking for. Over the years, Melanie had used her position at a non-profit organization to redirect funds toward personal expenses, lavish dinners, spa treatments, even vacations. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate, but Carol's sharp eye spotted the discrepancies. This is perfect, Carol said when I showed her the records. It's not just about the money. It's about trust. Once this comes out, she'll lose everything. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Despite everything, part of me still cared for Melanie. The thought of destroying her life didn't sit well, but Carol's conviction was contagious. She believed we were in the right, that this was the only way to reclaim what they'd stolen from us. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. Carol and I met at her lawyer's office, where she laid out the final steps of the plan. Once this goes public, there's no going back, she said, her voice firm. Are you ready for that? I hesitated, but only for a moment. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. That evening, I delivered the portfolio of evidence to Terry's board of directors. Carol's contact handled the media leak, ensuring the story would break within hours. Meanwhile, Carol sent the records of Melanie's financial misconduct to her nonprofits board, accompanied by a strongly worded anonymous letter. By midnight, the first headlines had exploded online. CEO Terry Aldridge accused of embezzlement and nonprofit leader faces allegations of misuse of funds. Carol called me as the news spread like wildfire. It's done, she said, her voice triumphantly sharp. They're finished. But as I sat in my darkened living room, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, hollow. The next morning, Melanie showed up at the house. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot from crying. Henry, she said, her voice cracking, Please let me in. I didn't move from the doorway. What do you want? I know it was you, she said, her voice shaking. You did this. You and Carol. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. You don't get to play the victim, Melanie. You brought this on yourself. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't flinch. Henry, I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I've hurt you. This isn't justice, it's cruelty. Cruelty? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You think this is cruel? You think I didn't feel cruel watching you destroy everything we built? This conversation is over, I said flatly, stepping back and shutting the door with a firm click. Later that day, Carol called. The fallout is worse than I expected. Terry's company is calling an emergency board meeting, and Melanie's nonprofit is already distancing themselves. We did it, Henry. We won. Yeah, I said, forcing the words out. We won. But as Carol reveled in the victory, I couldn't shake the growing sense of doubt gnawing at me. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like scorched earth. The fallout from our plans spread like wildfire, consuming every corner of Terry and Melanie's lives. By the end of the week, Terry's company had placed him on indefinite leave, pending an internal investigation. His name was splashed across every business section. Scandal Rock's prominent CEO. His carefully cultivated image of success and integrity was now a punchline. Melanie didn't fare much better. Her nonprofit announced a comprehensive audit of its finances, a clear indication they were severing ties with her. The board members released a public statement expressing their shock and disappointment at the allegations. Melanie had become persona non grata in her own career, a pariah in the world she'd once commanded. Carol was relentless in keeping me updated on every little development. Each new headline, each whispered rumor, was another victory for her. But for me, the satisfaction I'd expected never came. Instead, it felt like I was watching a slow-motion collapse, one I'd orchestrated but no longer had the stomach to witness. A week after the news broke, I was sitting alone in the house when my phone buzzed. It was a call from Melanie. What do you want? I said, my tone flat, detached. Her voice was barely a whisper. Henry, I need to see you. Please. Why? I need to talk to you. Face to face. I hesitated. Against my better judgment, I said, fine. When she arrived, her usually impeccable appearance was frayed. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged. Thank you, she said softly, her voice trembling. Thank you for letting me come. What do you want, Melanie? I asked, staying near the doorway. If you're here to beg for forgiveness, don't bother. She flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. Then why are you here? She looked up, her eyes filling with tears. I need you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it. Her words caught me off guard. They were raw, unguarded in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. But they weren't enough. Not after everything she'd done. Why, Melanie? I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Why did you do it? She took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to speak. I don't know, she said finally. At first, it was just excitement, something different. But it spiraled so fast, and before I knew it, I couldn't stop. I hate myself for it, Henry. I really do. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. For months, I'd been consumed by anger and betrayal. But hearing her admit her own self-loathing sparked something else, pity. I pushed it down, unwilling to let her off the hook. You didn't just betray me, I said coldly. You destroyed everything. And for what? For someone like Terry? She nodded, tears spilling over. I don't know what I was thinking. I've lost everything because of it. My career, my reputation, you. She trailed off, her voice breaking. I can't fix this, I said finally. What's broken can't be put back together. She nodded again, her shoulders slumping as if my words had crushed her. I understand. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What was so wrong with us that you needed him? She let out a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. It wasn't about you, Henry. It was about me. I felt invisible, like I wasn't enough. And Terry made me feel seen. Her words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to argue, to tell her she'd always been enough for me, but I couldn't, because maybe in some way I'd failed her too. I'm not excusing what I did, she continued. It was wrong. But I need you to know, it wasn't because I didn't love you. I didn't respond. That night, Carol called. How are you holding up? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. Melanie came by. What did she want? To apologize. To say she's sorry. Carol scoffed. Of course she's sorry. She's sorry she got caught. Maybe, I said, but I think she's also sorry for what she's lost. Henry, Carol said, her tone sharp, don't let her manipulate you. She made her choices. Don't forget that. I haven't, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. As Carol continued talking, I stared out the window, watching the darkened street. Melanie's words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what we'd done. Not just to her and Terry, but to ourselves. Carol's voice broke through my thoughts. Are you listening? Yeah, I said, though the truth was I wasn't. My mind was somewhere else, caught between anger and regret, between revenge and something I couldn't yet name. The days that followed felt surreal. The headlines about Terry and Melanie's downfall slowly began to fade, replaced by the next scandal, the next tragedy. But for the four of us, Carol, Terry, Melanie, and me, nothing felt resolved. The wreckage was everywhere, and no one seemed to know how to move forward. Carol was relentless in keeping me updated, texting or calling almost daily. She was thriving on the chaos we'd created, reveling in every new humiliation Terry faced. He's selling the house, she said during one of our calls, her voice practically gleaming with satisfaction. His company froze his accounts, and now he's scrambling to liquidate assets. It's pathetic. Good for him, I muttered, the bitterness in my voice sharper than I intended. What's wrong? Carol asked, sensing the shift in my tone. This is what we wanted, isn't it? I guess, I replied, but it doesn't feel like a win. Henry, you need to stop second-guessing this. They betrayed us. They deserved everything they got. I know, I said, but the words felt hollow. I just didn't think it would feel so empty. One evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. It was from our first anniversary, a trip to Napa Valley. Melanie was smiling in every picture. A sharp knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood Carol. I brought wine, she said with a smirk, holding up a bottle. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked straight to the kitchen like she'd done it 1,000 times before, grabbing 2 glasses from the cabinet without asking. You look like you need this, she said, pouring the wine and sliding a glass toward me. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip. The alcohol burned as it went down, but it was a welcome distraction. Carol leaned against the counter, watching me closely. What's going on with you, Henry? You've been distant. I sighed and set my glass down. I don't know. It's just, everything feels wrong. I thought getting revenge would make me feel better, but it hasn't. It's just left me hollow. Carol's expression hardened. They deserved it, she said firmly. They made their choices. Don't let guilt eat you alive. It's not guilt, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. It's just, I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life is gone. Carol stepped closer, her voice softening. Henry, you're stronger than you think. You don't need Melanie. Her hand rested on my arm, and for a brief moment, I felt something stir. A flicker of connection, maybe, or desperation. I wasn't sure. Before I could process it, she leaned in and kissed me. It was quick, tentative, and over before I could react. She pulled back, her eyes searching my face for some kind of response. Carol? I said. I'm sorry, she said quickly, her cheeks flushing. I thought. What are we doing? I asked, stepping back. This isn't what I want. She blinked, hurt flashing across her face before she masked it with anger. Fine, she said, grabbing her purse. Forget it. Without another word, she stormed OU. A week later, I started packing. When the last box was loaded into the moving truck, I stood in the driveway, staring at the empty house. It had been my home, but it no longer felt like it. Then I started the engine and drove away, leaving the past behind. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally moving forward, toward something new, toward something whole, toward myself.